If someone had told me a year ago that I'd end up in an all-out war with my neighbor over a simple mailbox, I would have laughed in their face. But here I am, telling you a story that spiraled out of control, starring a woman so nosy and bitter she made drama out of nothing. Her name was Karen, and for some twisted reason only her inflated ego could explain, she developed a personal vendetta against my mailbox. It began subtly, just little things I could brush off. One day I noticed the mailbox was slightly off-center, maybe nudged by a kid's bike or strong wind. But then it happened again, and again, until suspicion began replacing my doubts. Initially, I didn't want to believe someone was intentionally targeting it, but curiosity got the better of me when strange things kept happening around the neighborhood too. I decided to install a security camera, not for the mailbox specifically, but because there had been a string of petty thefts and vandalism lately. I figured it couldn't hurt to keep an eye out. What I saw on the very first night of footage left me stunned. There she was, Karen, in a flowery bathrobe and clutching a flashlight, marching up to my mailbox in the dead of night like she was on a mission. And then she kicked it, full force, not once, repeatedly. It was surreal, like watching a middle-aged suburban vigilante battling imaginary demons. I couldn't believe it, honestly. I watched the footage on repeat, first in disbelief, then laughter. Who does that? Who sees a mailbox and thinks, yes, this must be destroyed? Any sensible person would have confronted her, maybe called the cops, but not me. I was curious just how far she'd go. So I reinstalled the mailbox the next day, not saying a word to anyone. That night, she returned, this time just giving it a shove with her hands before casually walking off like it was her routine evening exercise. At that point, I knew this wasn't ending anytime soon unless I stepped in. It became my silent battle. I watched her do it over and over again on my cameras, pushing, kicking, even trying to tear the mailbox off with her bare hands one night. Karen had clearly lost it, and I realized if this woman wanted to wage war over a mailbox, I'd give her one she couldn't win. I began researching heavy-duty options. Reinforced steel, concrete, even shock delivery systems crossed my mind, but I didn't want a lawsuit. Then it hit me, titanium. Yes, it sounded like overkill, but so was my situation. I contacted a local locksmith and commissioned a mailbox that could withstand impact, corrosion, and unhinged neighbors. When installation day came, Karen drove by mid-process. She stopped in the street, mouth slightly open, eyes bulging with confused rage. I pretended not to notice her and kept supervising the workers. The new setup was anchored deep in reinforced concrete. That mailbox wasn't going anywhere, not with a baseball bat, not even a sledgehammer. It stood gleaming in the sun, a small but mighty monument of defiance. That evening I brewed a fresh cup of coffee and opened the camera app, knowing full well she wouldn't be able to resist the challenge. And right on cue, at 2 a.m. sharp, Karen appeared like clockwork. Flashlight in hand, same floral robe flapping in the wind, she approached the new mailbox cautiously, this time with the wariness of someone about to battle something real. Then the moment I'd been waiting for, she wound up and launched her foot straight at it. What happened next was pure art. Her foot bounced off with a thud and she was sent flying backwards, landing hard on her backside in the middle of the sidewalk. The flashlight rolled out of her hand. She curled up, groaning, clutching her foot like she'd just lost a duel with a medieval weapon. I watched it all live, sipping my coffee, smiling like a man watching his favorite sitcom hit its peak moment. The next morning, I strolled outside to pick up the newspaper, and there she was, Karen, perched stiffly on her front porch bench with a bag of ice wrapped around her foot. She tried to act like nothing was wrong, but I could feel the fury steaming off her even from across the street. She didn't look at me, but I knew she saw me. Oh, she saw me all right. It was the kind of moment that makes all the quiet patience worth it. If it had been anyone else, I might have felt a flicker of sympathy. But after the months she spent harassing me and turning my mailbox into her personal punching bag, I didn't feel an ounce of guilt. All I felt was a quiet, victorious satisfaction that could only come from watching karma land a perfect roundhouse kick. But Karen, being Karen, wasn't the type to accept defeat, especially one so public and humiliating. Most people would take the L and move on, not her. Later that same day, I was washing my truck when I noticed an unfamiliar, sleek black car pulling up to her driveway. A man in a sharp suit stepped out and rang her doorbell, holding a briefcase and a thick folder. A lawyer. I didn't need to guess twice. I watched from my driveway, towel in hand, while Karen hobbled out to greet him, dramatically limping as if she'd just returned from war. I had no idea what she was plotting, but I knew one thing: it wasn't going to be rational. The very next day it arrived, a legal notice tucked ironically inside the same titanium mailbox she'd tried to destroy. Karen was suing me. Yes, suing me for deliberately constructing a hazardous structure with the intent to harm third parties. I nearly dropped the envelope from laughing so hard. She kicked my property, voluntarily, and now she wanted to act like I was the villain in some elaborate Bond movie plot. It was absurd. But if she wanted a fight in court, she was going to get one. I didn't even bother hearing a lawyer. The facts and the footage were all the defense I needed. On the day of the hearing, I showed up to the courthouse alone, dressed neat but simple. Karen, on the other hand, made a theatrical entrance. Her foot was now wrapped in a thick medical bandage, and she walked in dramatically leaning on a cane with her overconfident lawyer at her side. It was like watching a high-budget community theater production. She sat down with a sour face, whispering intensely to her legal rep while casting glares in my direction. When the judge entered and called our case, her lawyer rose to present a speech that would have made Shakespeare proud. According to him, I was a malicious homeowner who had rigged a booby-trapped mailbox with the intent of causing physical harm. When the judge turned to me and asked how I responded to the charges, I didn't miss a beat. "Your Honor," I said, "my neighbor had destroyed 3 of my mailboxes before I reinforced this one. I simply wanted it to stop." The judge raised an eyebrow and asked for proof. That's when I pulled out the USB stick containing the golden evidence, every late-night attack, every shove, every boot to the box. The officer plugged it in, and the courtroom lights dimmed as the screen flickered to life. Silence fell over the room as everyone watched Karen approach the mailbox, flashlight in hand, and kick it like a soccer ball. The footage paused perfectly on the frame, showing her foot ricocheting off and her falling backwards in pure agony. The courtroom was still. The judge let out a sigh, removed his glasses, and turned to Karen. "Ma'am, did you kick the mailbox of your own free will?" She tried to stumble over her words, muttering something about not knowing it was that solid. But it was no use. The judge was done. "Case dismissed," he said flatly. "Next case." And just like that, Karen lost. Again, it was glorious. I walked out of that courtroom lighter than air, but I should have known better. For Karen, losing in front of a judge wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of her next ridiculous move. You'd think after being embarrassed in court and publicly caught red-handed, Karen would have accepted her loss and gone back to living quietly. But nope, she came back with a vengeance. Only this time she wasn't just targeting me. She was determined to rally the entire neighborhood against me and my so-called dangerous mailbox. A few days after the court hearing, whispers started circulating. Karen had begun gathering signatures for a petition. Her mission: to force me to remove the titanium mailbox, claiming it posed a threat to the community. The absurd part? She used child safety as her main argument. That's right. Suddenly, the mailbox was a threat to children who didn't even exist in our community. See, our neighborhood wasn't exactly a haven for kids. It was mostly elderly residents and quiet couples without children. The closest thing we had to a child was Max, the old Labrador down the street who napped on his porch all day. But logic wasn't Karen's strong suit. She started going door to door with a clipboard in hand and a fake limp, explaining to neighbors that my mailbox was a public hazard. Her dramatic performance, however, didn't go as planned. The first woman she approached just shut the door in her face. The second laughed outright and told her to get a life. But the real masterpiece came next. One of our neighbors, a quiet but clever woman named Sandra, decided to take matters into her own hands. After hearing Karen's spiel, Sandra asked for the petition, smiled sweetly, and told Karen she'd help get more signatures, but what she actually did was genius. She rewrote the petition completely, turned it into a document requesting Karen's removal from the neighborhood. Then she went door to door herself, letting everyone know what had been going on, and the response, overwhelming. People who had never spoken more than a wave or two started opening up about years of Karen's ridiculous HOA complaints, petty fines, and condescending lectures about garden gnomes and curtain colors. Within 3 days, the rewritten petition had more signatures than Karen had managed in weeks. For the first time in years, the neighborhood was united, asterisk against asterisk her. It wasn't just about the mailbox anymore. It was about years of frustration finally bubbling to the surface. Karen had poked the bear one too many times, and now the community was ready to push back. According to the HOA rules, if a resident became a consistent problem and the board received enough formal complaints, a vote could be held to expel them from the neighborhood. By the end of the week, I received an email from the community council. An emergency meeting had been scheduled and the subject listed at the top, Karen. On the day of the meeting, the community hall was more crowded than I'd ever seen it. People showed up early, eager to witness what everyone was calling the fall of Karen. She walked in trying to appear unfazed, holding her head high with that same arrogant posture she always wore. But her eyes betrayed her. She knew. She could feel it in the air. The room had turned against her. The board president stood up, cleared his throat, and announced, "Due to multiple complaints, we are initiating a formal vote on whether to remove Ms. Karen from the community." Karen's face drained of color. She tried to object, tried to say it was all lies, a conspiracy, but no one was buying it. People began shouting out their stories about her spying, her noise complaints, her attempts to fine a man for painting his door the wrong shade of beige. It was like a dam broke and years of irritation spilled into that room all at once. The vote happened right then and there. And the result? Unanimous. Karen was officially expelled. The decision was final. Karen had 30 days to sell her house and leave the neighborhood for good. And let me tell you, those 30 days were the most peaceful, joyous, and downright entertaining ones we'd experienced in years. People who had lived next to each other for a decade without ever sharing more than a nod now stood together in driveways, laughing, bonding, even celebrating. There was a strange sort of unity in the air, one built on shared relief and a common enemy finally dethroned. Karen, once the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, now sat on her porch in silence, the "For Sale" sign stabbed into her front lawn like a flag of surrender. Every day I made a point to walk past her house, smile warmly, and greet her with a cheerful good morning. It wasn't petty, it was polite. But deep down, I knew it ate her alive. She'd sit there pretending not to hear, but her clenched jaw and stiff shoulders said otherwise. She wasn't used to being ignored, let alone defeated. Slowly, her house began to empty. Furniture was hauled away. The flower beds she once obsessively maintained grew wild, and the glare she wore like armor faded into something duller, resignation. And me? I enjoyed every minute of watching her reign crumble. On the day she finally left, no one waved goodbye. No one helped her pack. The moving truck pulled away under a sky so blue it felt poetic. A handful of neighbors stepped outside just to make sure it was real, to witness the final exit of the neighborhood's longest-standing nuisance. Then she was gone. No more early morning inspections. No more snide letters about lawn height. Just silence. Beautiful, blessed silence. And through it all, my titanium mailbox stood proudly at the edge of my property, unbothered and undefeated. With Karen gone, the neighborhood transformed. It was like someone had turned the volume down on years of background stress. The weekly HOA meetings became relaxed affairs filled with actual community-building ideas instead of discussions about curtain colors and mailbox styles. People planted flowers without fear of fines. Someone even painted their garage door teal, and no one batted an eye. The atmosphere was lighter, friendlier. You could feel it in the way people lingered outside, how laughter echoed more freely, how front porches suddenly became places to gather again. One evening, as I sat on my porch sipping lemonade, a couple from down the street walked over. "We just wanted to say thanks," the woman said, smiling. "If you hadn't stood up to her, we'd still be dealing with her madness." I hadn't expected gratitude. I wasn't trying to be a hero, I just wanted my mailbox left alone. But somehow my little battle had turned into the spark that brought a community back to life. And that titanium mailbox, it became a symbol. People would nod at it as they passed. Some even gave it a respectful tap, like it had earned its place in neighborhood lore. Life moved on, as it always does. Karen became a memory, one we joked about at block parties and barbecues. "Remember when she tried to fine Tom for having a plastic flamingo?" someone would say, and everyone would groan or laugh. I couldn't have planned any of it if I tried. What started as a strange, infuriating nuisance turned into something bigger, a neighborhood reclaiming its peace. And at the center of it all was a mailbox built like a tank and a woman who just couldn't take no for an answer. But in the end, it wasn't about winning a feud. It was about reminding everyone that sometimes the best way to deal with a Karen is to outlast her. Life had finally settled into a rhythm that didn't involve nightly footage of mailbox assaults or ridiculous HOA complaints, and honestly, it felt like a long exhale after holding your breath for too many years. The neighborhood had changed, something deep had shifted. We weren't just a row of silent houses anymore. We were neighbors, friends, people who had come together not just in frustration, but in shared victory. And my mailbox, it stood as a kind of quiet monument. People still brought it up in conversation. It became the unofficial mascot of resistance. Kids who visited their grandparents even gave it nicknames. The Wall, one called it. Karen Slayer, joked another. But it wasn't just symbolic. The sense of safety and quiet strength it gave me that was real. After all, it wasn't just about stopping Karen, it was about reclaiming my right to be left alone. The months that followed were smooth. I gardened without criticism. I painted my shutters navy blue, something Karen would have sent a typed letter about, and no one said a thing. I'd catch neighbors walking by, pausing to admire the flowers or wave as they passed. There was no tension in the air anymore, no silent judgment lurking behind curtains. It was peace, real, full-bodied peace. One afternoon, I found myself sitting on my porch again, same spot, same cup of coffee, just watching the street go quiet as the sun dipped. The neighborhood felt more alive now, even in its calm. That's when Sandra, the same neighbor who had flipped Karen's petition into her removal notice, came by with a couple of folding chairs and 2 cold lemonades. "Thought you might enjoy some company," she said with a grin. We sat and laughed for hours, sharing stories that only people who had survived Karen could appreciate. "Do you remember the time she fined Jim for parking his own RV on his own lawn?" Sandra asked between sips. I nodded. "Yeah, and Jim replied by wrapping the whole thing in Christmas lights." It was ridiculous, and now it was funny. The beauty of that mailbox battle was that it showed everyone what they were capable of when they stopped tolerating nonsense. Nobody had wanted to be the one to stand up before. Karen had been so relentless for so long that people just surrendered to her reign. But once someone stood up, once someone said enough, that courage spread like wildfire. What started with titanium ended with unity, and that was the part I appreciated most. Karen may have thought she was fighting against a mailbox, but in truth, she was battling a neighborhood that had finally found its spine. A few weeks after her departure, I got a package in the mail. Ironic, I know. It was from a neighbor 2 streets over, someone I barely knew. Inside was a mug that read, "Property of the Unbreakable Mailbox." I laughed so hard I nearly dropped it. Along with the mug was a note. "Thanks for keeping us sane. This is your trophy." I didn't need a trophy, but I'll admit, I proudly placed it on my kitchen counter where I could see it every morning. It served as a reminder. Not of the battle, but of what came after. As summer rolled in, the neighborhood kept thriving. More people came out of their shells. Porch lights flicked on in the evenings as couples sat outside enjoying the breeze. Small changes, but meaningful. And every time I saw someone look at that mailbox with a little smirk or knowing glance, I felt it again, that quiet pride. Not because I won, but because we all did. We faced the tyranny of one stubborn woman with a grudge and a bad attitude, and we didn't just survive it. We built something better from it. Summer wore on, and that peaceful atmosphere we fought so hard to reclaim only deepened with time. It wasn't just about having fewer arguments or fewer complaints. It was about finally feeling at home, like you didn't have to brace yourself every time you stepped outside. The strange thing is, it took a petty, bizarre feud over a mailbox to show everyone just how long they had been walking on eggshells. Without Karen's surveillance and constant nitpicking, even the air felt different. And for me, the quiet meant more than anything. I found myself enjoying little things again, like sitting outside reading a book without worrying whether my grass had grown an inch too tall, or painting flower pots without fearing I'd get a letter about visual disharmony. I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to in years. Birds building nests in the tall oak tree, kids visiting their grandparents riding their scooters past my mailbox and tapping it like a good luck charm, neighbors waving a little longer than usual. There was something in that atmosphere that made people friendlier, more open. Sandra began organizing little Friday evening meetups, a few folding chairs, iced drinks, and easy conversation. It wasn't anything formal, just people showing up and finally enjoying their space. We even joked about putting up a plaque in front of my mailbox. "The Great Mailbox Standoff, 2024, it would read, followed by, "Here lies the last nerve Karen ever touched." But even with all the laughter, I couldn't help but reflect on how far things had come. There was a time when I thought maybe I was overreacting, when I second-guessed myself for getting annoyed at a mailbox being knocked over. It's strange how people like Karen can make you question what's reasonable. They chip away at you, one complaint, one sideways glance at a flower bed, one HOA memo at a time. They make you believe you're the problem until one day you snap, except that day, instead of snapping, I built a wall. A sleek titanium one. And funny enough, it didn't just hold up my mail, it held up my patience, my dignity, and eventually my community. That mailbox became a turning point, not just for me, but for everyone who had lived under Karen's long shadow. We didn't just celebrate her leaving, we celebrated what came after. Jim finally built the shed his wife had wanted for years. Linda decorated her front yard with pink flamingos and pinwheels. Even Tom, the grumpy old guy who hadn't said more than 3 words in a decade, showed up to the block barbecue with his homemade chili and a smile. It was like a great exhale swept through the neighborhood, shaking off years of quiet frustration. And yet through it all, I knew deep down that if Karen hadn't started her bizarre obsession with my mailbox, none of this might have happened. It's strange how people with bad intentions can accidentally create something good. She wanted to intimidate, to control, to push people around, and in the end, she pushed us right into unity. That's the irony of it all. She tried to knock something down, and instead, she built something up, just not in the way she imagined. And me. I was just the guy with the mailbox, the guy who got sick of replacing wooden posts and decided it was time to make a stand, quite literally. I'll never forget the image of her falling backward on the sidewalk, cursing under her breath and grabbing her foot. It plays in my memory like a slow-motion highlight reel, and no matter how many times I think about it, it still brings a smile to my face. Not because she got hurt, though poetic justice is satisfying, but because that moment, that exact second of impact, was when everything changed. It was when the neighborhood finally said, "Enough," and the silent majority found its voice. Part 7. As autumn rolled in, bringing crisp air and golden leaves, the neighborhood continued to blossom in the absence of its former dictator. Karen was gone, truly gone, and there wasn't a single person who missed her. The house she left behind sat empty for a while, its windows blank and quiet, like it too was taking time to recover from years of constant scrutiny. The for sale sign was eventually taken down, and a nice retired couple moved in, quiet, friendly folks who waved at everyone and didn't seem the type to worry about mailbox shapes or curtain alignment. When I introduced myself, the husband chuckled and said, "So you're the guy with the famous mailbox." I couldn't help but laugh. Word had traveled far and wide. The story had become local legend, spreading beyond our cul-de-sac to neighboring streets. People started referring to dramatic situations as pulling a Karen, and if anyone ever suggested anything overly strict or nitpicky, someone else would chime in, "Careful now, that sounds like a Karen rule." It was hilarious, but also kind of heartwarming. Something ridiculous had united us. That mailbox had been kicked, pushed, cursed at, and finally built back stronger than ever, not just physically, but symbolically. It had become a message: we don't let pettiness win here anymore. One evening, while attending one of Sandra's little porch gatherings, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. A small group of neighbors, people I barely knew before all this, sitting in a circle laughing so hard they were wiping tears from their eyes. They were rewatching the security camera footage, the now infamous moment when Karen's foot met unmovable titanium. Someone had saved it, edited it, even slowed it down with dramatic music. They were calling it the fall. It was ridiculous and over the top. And it was absolutely perfect. They offered me popcorn like I was some local celebrity. "Come on," Sandra said. "You deserve the front row seat." I sat down, took the popcorn, and watched the moment again. And while I laughed, a small part of me felt a strange kind of gratitude. Not for the chaos or the stress Karen had caused, but for what came after. That struggle reminded everyone that sometimes, standing your ground doesn't just protect you, it inspires others to do the same. People had lived for years putting up with nonsense just to avoid confrontation. But all it took was one stubborn woman pushing a little too hard and one mailbox that refused to budge for everything to shift. At some point, a neighbor named Dave raised his glass and toasted, "To the mailbox that broke a tyrant's foot and set us all free." Everyone clinked their cups, laughing, and I realized that moment was bigger than me. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about pride. It was about reminding people that peace is worth fighting for, even if the battle begins with something as silly as a mailbox. That night, as I walked home, I passed by that steel post shining faintly under the porch light. I gave it a gentle tap and smiled. It had done its job well. And while I didn't expect any more drama, I did keep my cameras rolling, more out of habit than suspicion. Not because I expected another Karen to rise, but because I'd learned something valuable. Peace doesn't always last forever. Sometimes you have to protect it. And if that meant watching over my mailbox like it was sacred ground, I was okay with that. After all, it wasn't just a mailbox anymore. It was a line in the sand that said, "No more." And everyone knew it. Winter eventually came, settling quietly over our little corner of the world, blanketing everything in soft white snow and slower days. The festive lights came out, porches sparkled, and laughter echoed through the streets as neighbors shared cocoa and stories around fire pits. It was the first holiday season in years that didn't come with passive-aggressive flyers from Karen about the approved color temperature of string lights or the visual clutter of inflatable snowmen. People decorated however they wanted, multicolor, twinkling, blinking chaos and all, and it was beautiful. The neighborhood was finally free to be itself, quirks and all, and the joy was unmistakable. I stood on my porch one chilly evening, coffee warming my hands, just watching the snow fall gently around the mailbox. There it stood, proud and untouched, no boot prints, no dents, not a scratch. Every time I looked at it, I couldn't help but chuckle. What started as the most annoying recurring vandalism had become one of the most impactful things to happen to our community. A single fixture had survived relentless attacks, sparked neighborhood unity, and become a symbol of quiet resistance. Some people hang flags. We had a mailbox. Titanium strong, unapologetically bold, and beautifully immovable. What made it more poetic was how invisible the change had been until it was. Before all this, people barely spoke to one another. We lived behind fences and blinds, tolerating nonsense for the sake of comfort. But once one person stood up, once Karen pushed just a little too far, that fragile quiet cracked open to reveal something strong beneath it: community. Real connection. People stopped letting things slide. They stopped swallowing their frustrations, and that made all the difference. The mailbox was just the spark. The fire was already waiting to burn away the nonsense. Eventually, a couple of new residents moved in and asked about the infamous mailbox. "Is it true someone actually got hurt trying to destroy it?" I smiled and nodded. "That and a whole lot more." They laughed, thinking it was a neighborhood myth, like some exaggerated urban legend, but the veterans of the block knew. And when they shared the tale at barbecues or over evening drinks, they told it with the kind of passion usually reserved for folklore. And then she flew backwards. Like the mailbox said, "Not today, lady." It became the new campfire story, one that always ended with someone raising a glass to the thing that started it all. Time went on, months passed, seasons changed. But one thing remained the same: peace, not perfection, just peace. People didn't always agree, but now they talked instead of tattled. Problems were solved over fences, not through forms. And while we all knew nothing stays the same forever, we also knew that if another Karen ever showed up, she wouldn't last long. Not in this neighborhood, not with this crew, not with this mailbox still standing guard like a knight in steel armor. So that's how it all happened. A war over a mailbox turned into a movement. A woman's petty obsession became the reason an entire street remembered how to stand up for itself. And me? I just wanted to protect my mail, but what I got in return was far more valuable. I got my peace. I got my community. And best of all, I got to sip coffee every morning looking at that indestructible post, knowing that sometimes the strongest stand you can take is the one you never expected to make.